Arguably, the most known prophet in this world is the Prophet Jesus alayhi salam. Prophet Isa alayhi salam. Isa alayhi salam has a great miraculous story of him becoming one of the greatest prophets. But that all starts with a dedication and a good intention. From the family of Isa alayhi salam came the family of Ali Imran. And the wife of Imran, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, إِذْ قَالَتِ امْرَأَةُ عِمْرَانَ رَبِّ إِنِّي نَذَرْتُ لَكَ مَا فِي بَطَنِي مُحَرَّرًا فَتَقَبَّلْ مِنِّي. She said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I vow to dedicate my child for your sake. This child is for your sake solely and only for you. So accept this from me. What is your intention for your child? What does success mean for your child? Is it to become a doctor? To acquire a PhD? Or is it actually to have a child that is devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? To have a pious child, a child that prays their salah, a child that fasts in Ramadan, a child that comes to the masjid and reads Quran. Sometimes we need to ask ourselves this question when we're raising our child. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَلَمَّا وَضَعَتْ قَالَتْ رَبِّ إِنِّي وَضَعْتُهَا أُنْثَى وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا وَضَعَتْ وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. And so, when this wife of Imran gave birth to this child, which she dedicated to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it turns out that this child was a daughter. She delivered this child and she said, "My Lord, I have given birth to a girl." And the context of this is that they lived in Palestine near Bayt al-Maqdis. And so that the idea was this child would grow up and they would be pledging, this child would grow up. This child will grow up and serve the deen and serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and maybe become an imam or a leader. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds profoundly here and says the male is not like the female. And even though the statement becomes a much larger discussion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying from His wisdom that don't underestimate the role of a daughter. And don't underestimate the role of someone doing khidmah for the sake of Allah. It doesn't matter if you have a daughter or a son. Never ever underestimate someone doing khidmah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so later on we know that this daughter grows up to be Maryam alayhi salam, Mary, the mother of Jesus. And the parents of Maryam alayhi salam did not lose their focus. They did not lose their intention and their goal. They said, look, we made an intention. We're going to follow through with that intention as best as we can. How is it going to work? We don't know. But we're going to do our best and trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, oh Allah, we trust you, so protect her. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepted this dua, and not just accepted this dua, but accepted this dua lovingly and in the best manner possible. And she grants Maryam alayhi salam a guardian, but not just any guardian, a guardian which is a prophet. And we know this to be Zakaria alayhi salam. And so Zakaria alayhi salam becomes a guardian, a teacher, almost like a father figure. And Zakaria alayhi salam would go to the room of Maryam alayhi salam and check up on her every single day. And every single time he would check up on her, he would see that Maryam alayhi salam would always be devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She would always be praying, always be doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so one day, Zakaria alayhi salam, he walks into the masjid, into the room of Maryam alayhi salam, and he sees Maryam alayhi salam eating fruits that were not of that season. And so he asks Maryam alayhi salam, where did you get this from? And Maryam alayhi salam responded and replied, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me this. Teacher, why are you so confused? Dad, why is this difficult to understand? Mom, why doesn't this make sense to you? Sometimes our children will make us think something. Sometimes our children will teach us a lesson. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give to whoever He wants to give, whenever He wants, whatever He wants. Allah doesn't have any limits or restrictions. And so Zakaria alayhi salam, he realized, even though he was a prophet, even though he was a prophet of Allah, he looked at Maryam alayhi salam and her level of understanding, even at a young age. The prophet is learning a lesson from her. She's teaching her own teacher a lesson. Sometimes this will happen. Sometimes as parents, your kids might do something which teaches you to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes your children might even surpass you as parents. But you have to be smart enough to realize that. Even in these days of Ramadan, you might see your children reading more Quran than you. You might see your children be more dedicated to coming to Salatul Tarawih. You might see your children, maybe if you're a mother, you might see your daughter even wearing the hijab during Ramadan. And this might be something that you struggle with as a mother. And even if they do surpass you, never, ever ignore it. Don't ever discourage them. Rather, use that to motivate yourself. And we see this with our children of Palestine, that there are bombs going above their heads. Their plates are empty, yet they're smiling. Yet they're still praying their salah. Yet they're still reading Quran. From the entire story, we see the khair that comes from Isa alayhi salam, the khair that comes from Maryam alayhi salam, the khair that comes from Zakaria alayhi salam, the khair that comes from Yahya alayhi salam, all came back because of a vision and a dua from one parent, from one mother. So ask yourself this question when you're raising your child. Am I raising my child for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or am I raising my child for other reasons? Barakallahu feekum.